today, text join to 760-307-4075. If you have any littles, please check out our kids station. Your little ones can have fun in a safe environment and learn about Jesus while you enjoy the message.
Don't forget to visit our website at stationchurch.com or download our app where you can see past messages, current events, and connect with us on Connect Groups. We have a huge event coming up, guys, on June 3rd, so start preparing now. We're having a massive Station Church garage sale. So bring on all your stuff, and we're going to raise money for our new youth room that's going to have pool tables, ping pong, and so much more. Hey guys, don't forget at the end of the month, we're having pizza with the pastors. So join us and learn about our church and have an amazing pizza with Josh.
Pizza!
We're the Tucholskis. Have an amazing day. Woo!
Oh, we love the Tucholskis. I think they're still in Ireland. Is that true? Man, they vacation right. Good morning, everybody. We're so glad that you're here. It is a beautiful day. How many of you enjoying May gray? Gray May. We went from the world's longest winter right into gray May. So it's unusual, but we're embracing it. It's going to be hot, and then you're going to wish we had these cooler, cloudy days. Hey, I'm so glad that you're here. If you are new or visiting, I would love to meet you. And we have an entire area in the lobby that is designated just for that. And we would encourage you to stop by. We've got some free gifts, coffee mugs, Bibles, notebooks, even hugs are free. And we can answer any questions you might have. And you can sign up for Pizza with the Pastors, which is what we do each and every month. At the end of the month, that's our opportunity just to get to know you. And you can ask questions or get to know what this church is all about anyway. And so I encourage you to visit that if you haven't already. And how many of you guys are getting our weekly email newsletter? Show of hands, a little participation. Yeah, okay, most of you, that's good. If you don't have our weekly newsletter, you can pull out your phone right now and point it at this QR code behind me, and that'll pull up a digital connection card. You can sign up for our weekly email, or you can sign up to join a team, to be baptized, anything that your heart desires. Mostly it can be filled out on that digital connection card, and so check that out, and it's our way of saving trees and healing the planet. Amen? And so we care. We have a saying around here that we're not here just to gather on Sundays. I'm so glad that you're here, by the way. Like, I love Sundays, and it's a privilege and an honor that we have the freedom to do this, right? But if we only meet on Sundays and don't do anything else, I believe we're missing the mission. The purpose of the church is that we make a difference Monday through Saturday as well, right? And so we like to say on earth as it is in heaven, or more specifically in North County as it is in heaven. And we're going to be talking about that in some more detail today. But one of the ways that we actually do this is by trusting God in the area of our finances. If we want to follow God's leading, He always gives more vision than the provision at first. And so if we just say, hey, we don't have enough to do that, we won't accomplish what God wants to do. And so we say yes to God, we take a step of faith, and then He moves on our hearts and in response and generosity, and then we're able to follow through. And it's always this kind of risk, right? It's like, oh, should I trust God? I've got all these bills. How many of you guys got bills? Anybody got bills? No, if you're not raising your hand, I would love to talk to you, figure out how you're doing life. We all have bills. There's always expenses. But God says, knowing that, He says, hey, I want you to trust me. I want you to take a step of faith and actually give me your dollars. Now, how many of you think God needs our dollars? No, He does not. But what He wants so bad is our heart. And our money, it just has this stubborn ability to stick to our hearts and our hearts to our money. And so as you trust God, man, this is how we fulfill the mission of the church and do all He's calling the Station Church to do. So thank you for those of you who do worship and sacrifice in this way. And if you're not yet a tither, man, I challenge you. Hey, I'm a tither. We do this together. We lead by example, and God always provides and blesses in return. If anybody has seen that in their lives, would you give me an amen right there? Amen. We got some, yeah. God, that's just what He does. So if you would like to give, there's all kinds of ways as are on the screen. We use Venmo and text and our app and our website and giving box in the lobby. Well, listen, you guys are in for a special treat today. We've been talking about this idea of unstoppable church, meaning, as I just said, church is not something that we just do on Sundays, right? It's not just this gathering Sunday mornings. No, it's an unstoppable force. It's a movement on the earth, billions of people strong, and it's how we impact the community. And the heartbeat of the Station Church is that we would make a positive impact on the community around us. And if we're not doing that, we're not fulfilling God's plan for the earth. And so one of the ways that we're excited to impact the community is this new relationship. And so we have the founder of this organization called Foster the City. He's going to be sharing what that's about today. So would you do me a favor? Show him some love. Put your hands together as we welcome Philip Pattison.
Hey, well, good morning. Man, it is really, really good to be here with you. It was just a joy to worship with you guys this morning. As Pastor Josh said, my name is Philip Pattison. I'm with something called Foster the City. Foster the City really is a movement of churches like the Station that are working together to provide loving, supported homes for kids who have been neglected or kids who have been abused, kids coming into the foster care system. And again, it's such a privilege to be here with you. I'm stoked to be able to share for a few minutes about something that I think is really near to the heart of God. A conversation that I think is really near to the heart of God. And because it's near to the heart of God, it's near to the heart of your leadership here. It's near to the heart of this church. Today, I want to talk about the remarkable compassion of God. Okay, the remarkable compassion of God. And just so we're on the same page right out the gate, let me tell you what I mean when I say that. So if you look at the word compassion, you have calm, C-O-M, and then you have passion. Passion, we know, means to suffer. Calm, C-O-M, like community or communal, means with. So you have passion, to suffer. Calm means with. To suffer with. That's what compassion means. It means to actually stand with, to be with those who are struggling, to be with those who are suffering, right? To not keep our distance from those who are struggling, but to actually enter into, to move towards those who are suffering. And that's really near to the heart of God, isn't it? That's at the very essence of the gospel. It's what we've been singing about all morning, right? Is that when we were struggling, when we were in need, when we were vulnerable, God did not keep his distance from us, but he entered into our suffering. He moved towards us. Emmanuel, God with us. Right? This is something that's really near to the heart of God. In fact, if you open up the scriptures, it's clear, of course, that he loves every man, woman, and child in Carlsbad and San Diego County. He loves every man, woman, and child across this planet. God so loved the world, well done, that he gave his only son, right? But it's also clear when you open up the scriptures that there are some people that make the top of God's list. He loves everybody, but it's clear that there are some people that have a special place in his heart. You see it in the Old Testament, you see it in the New Testament. It's the orphan, it's the widow, it's the sojourner or the immigrant, and it's the poor. Time and again throughout scriptures you see it. In other words, it's those who are far from home, those who are without family, those who are without protection, those who are in need, those who are vulnerable. God has a special place in his heart. Psalm 82 says this. It says, defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed, rescue the weak and the needy. That's literally one of dozens and dozens and dozens of scriptures all throughout the Bible that make it absolutely crystal clear what God's heart is towards the vulnerable. And listen, because that has been a defining characteristic of God, that's been a defining characteristic of God's people since the very beginning. His church, for the last 2,000 years, time and again, you see example after example after example of this. In fact, did you know that the first known hospital in every nation across the globe was started by the church? Did you know that? Can I say it again? The first known hospital in every nation on the planet was started by followers of Jesus. If you look at education reform, prison reform, women's rights, the abolition of slavery, civil rights, the list could go on and on and on. They all trace their roots back to the people of God, to followers of Jesus. This is what we do. And guys, the same is true with foster care. Can I tell you about a guy named Charles Brace? Okay, anybody heard of Charles Brace? Probably not. Okay, Charles Brace was born in the 1800s in the Northeast, grew up, his parents are followers of Jesus. When he was young, he placed his faith in Jesus as well. One day, on a Sunday, he was sitting in church listening to a message from his pastor, and the pastor said something that just became this radically defining moment in his life. This is basically what the pastor said. I'm going to paraphrase, okay? He said, when we stop to consider, when we stop to remember all that God has done for us when we were in need, when we see those in need around us, it's impossible now for us to believe that we don't have at least some level of responsibility to do something. I feel like I butchered that. Can I try that again? When we stop to remember all that God has done for us when we were in need, all the ways that he's met us in compassion when we were hurting, when we were struggling, it's impossible for us to believe that we don't have at least some level of responsibility to do something when we see those in need around us. It was better the first time, but you guys are tracking with me, right? All right, so listen, that resonated with Charles. And so a few years would go by, and he'd be in New York City. He was studying to become a pastor. He was in Bible school. And one day, as a mid-20s college student, he took a walk through the streets of New York. And he walked into this neighborhood called 5 Points. And 5 Points, have you heard of 5 Points? It's because you watch Gangs of New York. Can you admit that here? All right. 5 Points. 5 Points at the time was known for its crime and its poverty, and its prostitution, its gang violence. And his heart just broke, he said, as he walked into this neighborhood. Because what he saw in front of him were a whole bunch of kids living in these really just broken, unhealthy environments. And his mind went back to what his pastor had said those years before. And he realized in light of all the ways that God had met him when he was struggling, when he was in need, he had to do something with what he saw in front of him. And so he got some of his buddies together. And they started what they called the Children's Aid Society, which, by the way, is still going on today, 150 years later. The Children's Aid Society started all kinds of programs that dealt at a root, systemic level with what they were seeing in front of them in 5 Points in the New York area. And so, for example, they started the first ever free school lunch programs. They started the first free dental clinics for kids. They started the first schools for kids who were disabled. They started the first ever PTA, Parent Teachers Association, came from the Children's Aid Society. Isn't that cool? But most notably, they started what we call here in America foster care. So they would help these kids who were living in these unhealthy environments find a stable home to live in while their biological families did what they needed to do to create a healthy environment, and then the families were restored back together. They were reconciled back. And what morphed and evolved from there became what we call in America today the foster care system. So are you tracking with me? Foster care was started by a pastor. Foster care was started by a Christian with the motivation that in light of all that God has done for us, we now get to do the same for those around us. Isn't that awesome? Guys, that's our legacy as the church. That's our history as God's people. And I'm stoked to be here because we get to carry on that same torch today. Guys, this is true with foster care. It's also true with adoption. I was just talking with a woman, I think it's Nicole. Is it Nicole? All right. I was just talking with Nicole out in the lobby. I know that this is something that is already a big part of the DNA of Station Church. At the station here, you guys have families that have already moved towards kids who were in need of a long-term, loving, forever home. This is already part of your culture. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but let me just kind of celebrate for just a minute how many thousands of years we've been doing this as the church. So listen, let me tell you. We have historical records that tell us about an early Roman tradition. When a child would be born into a Roman family, they would often do this tradition where they would place the child down at the feet of its dad. Okay? And when the dad stooped down and picked up the child into his arms, the child was legitimized, welcomed, celebrated, brought into that family, which is beautiful. It's, by the way, that's where we get the term raising our kids. It's from that tradition. The problem is sometimes the dad didn't stoop down and pick up the child. If the child looked sick, if the child wasn't the preferred gender of that day, if for whatever reason the dad didn't pick up the child would be taken outside of the city and be left alone to die. Actually, one of a couple things would happen. They would take this child out, it would be abandoned, it would either die, typically from wild animals or the elements or starvation, or it was not uncommon for slave traders to go around outside of the cities and collect these kids and end up selling them off into slavery, especially because so many of them were girls. So that was their destiny, death or slavery. By the way, that was completely common and legal practice at the time. They called it infant exposure. But we also have historical records that tell us how the people of God responded to that, how early followers of Jesus responded to that. We have records that tell us about how early Christians would go outside of the city at night and they would walk up and down the streets listening for the cries of children. And when they'd find these kids, they would bring them back into their own homes and they would raise them up as their own beloved sons and daughters. Guys, this is our history. And by the way, it was the early church that put pressure on the Roman government to outlaw that practice. This is our history. This is what we do, like remarkable compassion. This is what the church has done for thousands of years. And like I said just a few minutes ago, I'm stoked to be here because this wasn't just meant to be indicative of who we once were, but it's meant to be true of who we are today. That's what he's talking about, the unstoppable church. That's who we are called to be today. Here's the difference, though. You and I don't have to walk up and down the streets of San Diego County listening for the cries of children. Like the state of California has told us where we can find them. It was several years ago, my wife and I started fostering, eight plus years ago now. My wife and I started fostering kids. And we started bringing these kiddos into our home, and our hearts honestly just began to break for these kids and their stories and their families. At the time, I was pastoring a small church, and so as our hearts were beginning to break as a family, we stood in front of our congregation and said, hey guys, what if we do this together? What if we find some ways as a church community to start moving towards kids and families in our city? And so we started taking steps, and we began to build relationships with social workers. And at one point, a social worker sat down with me in my little office, and she said, hey, Philip, we really like working with your church. This is cool. She said, but the reality is, right now, and I'm quoting her, she said, we are in an emergency crisis. She said, there are far more kids coming into foster care today than we have homes that are ready to receive them. And she said, this is honestly just a little bit bigger than your church. She said, do you think that there might be other churches that might want to come alongside? You guys could link arms. She called it a faith alliance. She said, you guys can link arms together. Maybe you guys can help us change this crisis. Guys, it's been one of the greatest joys of my life watching the way churches like the Station, people like Pastor Josh here, the way that they've responded to that invitation from that social worker. We're seeing now what started with one little church that met in a senior center. Today is well over 200 churches that have linked arms together. And we're raising up foster families. We're raising up support friends for foster families. We're going to keep going until there's more than enough to meet the need. It's our vision, guys, that we want that one day there'd be a waiting list of families rather than a waiting list of kids in need of a home. And that it's going to be the church that's going to be on the front lines to make that happen. And I'm hoping and praying that some of you might feel called to be a part of that. When we started Foster the City, this faith alliance of churches, this movement of churches, we started with kind of a few core beliefs that were going to drive this thing forward, drive this vision forward. And I want to take just kind of the remaining time that I have here just to share those kind of three core beliefs. I'll make it quick. Can I say this real fast before I jump in? Foster care is not for everybody. Okay? So you can just take a breath for a second, okay? Just breathe. Everybody breathe. It's going to be okay. But listen, like foster care is just one expression of remarkable compassion. It's just one of the many expressions. Foster care is not for everybody. But listen, if you are a follower of Jesus, remarkable compassion is for you. That's actually not up for debate. You open up the scriptures, and you're going to see Jesus lived a life of a remarkable compassion. And as his followers, we follow in his footsteps. Foster care is one expression of that. Remarkable compassion is for everyone. Whatever expression God might be calling you into, I do hope that you'd open your mind and your heart to hear what he'd have to share with you. Because I think that these three core beliefs I'm about to share with you can help to serve as a foundation and a driving force, regardless of what the expression of compassion is. So we good? All right. All right. So here's the first core belief, and that this belief that every person has intrinsic value. You believe that? Every person has intrinsic value. I'm going to be preaching to the choir here for a minute, but let me just say it. In the book of Genesis, it says that we were created in the image of God. His fingerprint is on your life and is on my life. The book of Isaiah says that we are precious to God in his sight. Think about that. We're precious to him. In the book of Ephesians, I think it's Ephesians 1, it says that God spoke us forth from before the foundation of the world. Think about this. He spoke us forth from before the foundation. That means that the moment when your mom and your dad came together and put you into being, I know it's gross to think about, hang with me. The moment you were conceived, if Ephesians 1 is true, then that moment when you were conceived, that's second in your story. What came first was that you were birthed in the heart of God before the physical universe began. You're precious to him. I have a buddy who's a foster dad, and he tells a story about how he got a call for a kiddo who needed a placement for a while. And he was on the phone with the social worker, and he's like, hey, I've already got kids in the home right now. Can you tell me a little bit more about this little guy? I want to make sure that he's going to be a good fit for our family. And so the social worker is like, well, we don't know too much about him yet. He's brand new to the system. But she said, we know one thing. We know he's a biter. My buddy's like, well, what does that mean? Like, what does he bite? And he's like, I'm not sure I want to take in a biter. And he said, as soon as that thought hit him, all of his theology started flooding back into his mind. And he said, I realized that the term biter is an incomplete description of a child. The term biter is an inadequate, incomplete description of a human being. You know why? Because you're more than the worst things you've ever done, right? And you're more than the worst things that have been done to you. Can I just pause for just a minute? Set foster care to the side. Maybe the Spirit nudged you to be here today just because he needs you to hear that one thing. I'm going to say it one more time. I'd like you to hear it, and I'd like you to believe it. You are more than the worst things you've ever done. And you're more than the worst things that have been done to you. He loves you. He values you. You're precious to him. And he didn't just say it. It's not just ink on a page. He proved it. God proves his love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Every person, every man, woman, and child across this city matters to God. And that brings me to our second core belief. Okay, here's the second. It's the belief that their story, these kids' story, it's our story. It's my story. I might be a little bit biased here, but there may be no time in your life when you are more like God than in the moments when you open up your heart and your life to someone who's in need. Because that's exactly what he did for us, isn't it? There was a time in my life when I was hurting and I felt beat up and I felt alone. I felt lost. And I thought that because of all of the scars and the wounds and the junk from my past that I had lost any hope for my future. I remember it vividly that time. And God met me there in my lowest and darkest place, and he brought me into his family. And he gave me hope for my future. He calls me his son now. I call him my father. Is that your story? One of my favorite verses in all the Bible, it's also in Ephesians 1. It says this, it says, God decided in advance to adopt us into his own family by bringing us to himself through Jesus. Listen to this. This is what he wanted to do, and it gave him great pleasure. This is one of the greatest. Go ahead and keep that up if we could. I want us to see this. This is one of the greatest truths, most beautiful messages in all of the history of mankind. Listen, he decided in advance to adopt us into his family through Jesus Christ. Is what he wanted to do, and it gave him great pleasure. Again, I'm going to pause here for a minute and set foster care to the side. This isn't in my notes, but let me just say this. You might have been coming to the station for a little while. You might be checking things out. You might be exploring what Christianity, what faith, God, all of this is all about. Maybe you've even gotten to the place in your exploration. Maybe there is a God. Maybe there is. But even if there is a God, would he want someone like me? After all the things that I've done, after all the places that I've been, after all the things I've still struggled with today, would he even want someone like me? If that's you today, I beg you, let's put it back up one more time. I beg you, read this verse. Know this truth to be true. Not only is God willing to bring you into his family and call you his daughter, call you his son, he wants to. It would bring him great joy and great pleasure to welcome you into his family. The invitation is there. As a foster dad, I feel like I've gotten like just a tiny little glimpse of what God experiences, I think, in this scripture. Welcoming these kids into our home has brought a lot of joy and laughter and phenomenal memories. And the last little girl we brought into our home, we brought her when she was 2.5 months old. And we ended up fostering her for several years. And she was, again, it wasn't always easy, but it was a ton of fun. And in the kind of several years that we were fostering her, we were told by the judges and by the social workers that this little one wasn't going to have a home to go back to, like the kids we'd fostered in the past. And so it wasn't long ago that we moved from being her foster family to her forever family. We got to adopt this beautiful little girl. I think I might have a picture. Do we have a picture? We do. Look at that. That's her right there in the middle. Isn't she cute? That was during COVID, so we had our adoption ceremony in our living room right there. I wanted to show you two things. I wanted to show you my color-coded books in the background. I just noticed that. And number two, I wanted to show you how cute she is. Her name is Lucy. And we found out that the name Lucy actually means light. And that's exactly what she's been to my family. Even now I'm getting emotional. When I think about the way that I see that little girl and the joy and the pleasure that I find in her, that God actually sees that in me, how unbelievable is that? What a gift it is to be brought into the family of God, and what a gift it is that we get to do the same for others. But listen, God bringing us into his family, it brought pleasure. It brought joy. But for God to bring us into his family, it didn't just bring joy and pleasure, it also came with sacrifice, didn't it? For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. There is joy, but there's also a cross. In the same way, when you and I show remarkable compassion towards our neighbors, towards the vulnerable, there will always, always, always be a cost involved. When people hear that we foster, or they hear about Foster the City, we often get the same reaction. We get this over and over again. Oh, that's so cool that you guys do that. I could never do that. That's what I hear all the time. I could never do that. They're like, isn't that hard? Like, what if the kids come into your home? Maybe they've gone through some tough stuff, and like maybe they have behavior issues, or do you want to know if that's 100%? Not 100%. That's often the case. But here's the deal, guys. We all act out of the trauma that we've experienced in our life. Every person in this room. We all act out of the hard things we've experienced in our life. There's a healing process. The reality is most of these kids that come into our home have experienced significantly more trauma than you and I ever have. So yeah, sometimes it can be really hard. Other times people will say, oh man, isn't that hard? Like what if they're in your home for a long time and you get attached to them? And then you have to say goodbye. Isn't that hard? You want to know the answer to that? Yes, it is hard. I'm not a cold-hearted robot. Yes. It is difficult. Rips your heart out. The first little one we brought into our home, she was 4 months old. We had her for about a year. She very quickly became like a part of our family, like a sister to my biological kids, and like a daughter to us. She took her first steps in our living room. Her first word, she called me Dada. But over that year that we were falling in love with this little girl, we were also getting to know her biological parents. And the fact is they had made some mistakes. There was a reason why their daughter was with us. But they were doing everything that they possibly could to get their little girl back home. Taking all the right steps. So after about a year, the judge gave the green light and said, okay, it's time. And I remember it like it was yesterday, handing this little girl back into the arms of her dad at my front door. My son, my oldest son, who was 7 at the time, he said it was the first time he'd ever seen me cry. Because we wept that day. Of course it hurts. But we don't show compassion because it makes us feel good. Compassion's not about you. I have a buddy who says you don't foster to get a child for your family. You foster to give your family to a child. You see the difference? And again, that's true of any expression of compassion. You don't show compassion to get something for yourself. You show compassion to give yourself to something. But if we are willing to do that, if we are willing to embrace the pleasure and the joy of being able to show compassion and the sacrifice and the cost, it's incredible to think about the impact we can make. This brings me to the third and final core belief. And that's this, that our investment in the lives of the vulnerable can bring a long-term impact. Here's what I mean. As you can imagine, kids who grow up without a stable, healthy environment, they're far more susceptible to all kinds of other issues as they grow up. Okay, so for example, about half of the kids that age out of foster care, if they're not placed into a loving, stable home, about half will end up unemployed. About a third will end up on the streets. About half will develop a substance addiction. More than half will develop PTSD. Listen to this, you're actually twice as likely to develop PTSD as a child in foster care than a war veteran that's experienced active combat. Twice as likely. Suicidal tendencies for youth in foster care are 4 times higher. I know that the wording in here is really small. I've got all this in the back table. You can come and grab these and you can read these. But suicidal tendencies for youth in foster care are 4 times higher than that of the average youth. The FBI did a study several years ago. They said that 60% of the kids that they are rescuing from human trafficking today in the States come directly from the foster care system. So here's what we began to realize. As we started exploring, should we say yes to the social worker? Should we start trying to rally churches and be able to move towards these kids as a faith alliance? We began to realize that we needed churches and groups and individuals that were addressing all of those issues that I just talked about. Like homelessness and unemployment. We need IJM that's breaking down doors and rescuing men and women who are being trafficked right now. We need them to continue, and we need more. But what if, in addition to all of that, we also go upstream and we care for the kids before they ever enter into those issues? What would the stats in San Diego County look like in 15 years, 20 years, if every single child that entered into foster care today was placed into a Christ-loving, Christ-centered, loving, supported home? Again, we have this dream again that one day the Bay Area Church, the Orange County, the LA County, San Diego, Northern Nevada, those are all the areas we're serving, that the church would be known as the community where kids are brought in and cared for as beloved sons and daughters. That what was true of us 2,000 years ago would be true of us today. And I believe that God's calling some of you to be a part of that. In just a minute, I'm going to tell you a couple of critical ways that you can get involved. But first, I want to invite you just to hear about a little bit what's happening here in San Diego County. Let's go ahead and watch this video.
Hi, I'm Carrie, and I'm part of Foster the City, and we are a coalition of churches working together to address the foster care crisis right here in San Diego.
You can read it.
And I have a story to tell you about 3 little boys. See, these boys at the ages of 3, 2, and 9 months old were left alone in a van that was abandoned in a field, sometimes for hours or even days at a time without the care of a parent or an adult looking after them. Their basic needs weren't met: food, water, safety, security. And eventually their situation became known, and these boys were placed into foster care. And once in foster care, they moved from home to home, and this process really stripped them from a sense of safety, security, and belonging. They lost everything they knew. But a young couple from right here in San Diego heard their story, and they decided that God was calling them to open their hearts and their homes to these 3 young brothers. They took these boys in and gave them a bed to sleep in, food to eat, more than enough. And they began to see these boys' sense of safety, security, and hope restored. An example of this move from scarcity to abundance is this couple built an open pantry where the boys could see right with their own eyes that there's always going to be enough food for them, that their needs are going to be met. They began to restore these boys' sense of safety, belonging, and care. as they laughed with these boys, as they played with toys on the floor, as they cried with them, and as they took them in the evenings to run wild at the beach, they found a safe place and a place to heal, a place to grow, and a place to recover hope. I tell you this story because these 3 boys are just a few of the thousands of kids here in San Diego County in foster care, and we don't have nearly enough homes for them. Every kid, just like these boys, has a name. And every kid has a story, and that story matters to God. And because it matters to God, it matters to us. Our dream at Foster the City is that instead of a waiting list of kids in foster care, that there'd be a waiting list of homes ready to take them in. Foster the City is a coalition of churches working together here in San Diego toward that dream. Our mission is to provide a loving home for every kid in foster care. We do this in 2 ways. First, by raising up foster families from within the local church, and second, by raising up support friends for the foster families. These support friends provide practical, emotional, and spiritual care to help foster parents foster longer and stronger. Jesus cares deeply about the lives and stories of each one of these kids, and he's inviting us, his church, to join him in moving towards the most vulnerable among us. And with Foster the City's model, everyone can play a part. To learn more, visit fosterthecity.org.
My favorite line from that video is when Carrie says, she says, you know, there are thousands of kids in the San Diego County foster care system, and every one of these kids has a name and a story, just like Lucy, who I shared with you. Every one of them has a name. Everyone has a story, and every one of these kids' stories matter to God. And because their stories matter to God, they matter to us, don't they? And my hope and prayer is that God might stir in the hearts of at least a few of you that you might be wanting to enter into the stories of some of these kids in our backyard. If that's you today, there's a couple ways you can get involved. As Carrie said, you could actually take the step to become a foster parent. You could actually explore what it might look like to open up your home to a kid who is in need of some love and care and stability. Again, that's not for most of you. Can I just say that? That's not for most of you, but maybe for a few of you, that is for you. For the rest of us, I hope you can see that there's another way that you can make a significant difference. You see, one of the primary reasons why there's a shortage of foster families today across California is because foster families don't last very long. For all the reasons that I just described to you a few minutes ago. It's hard. Only about 40% of foster families nationwide, 40% will make it past their first year. 40%. Do you know what changes that retention? Is if a foster family takes their journey in the context of community. If they have, we call them support friends, if they have a community of support friends that will provide practical, emotional, and spiritual support, this is what enables them to foster longer and better. In fact, with this model right here, we're not seeing 40% make it past their first year. We're seeing more than 90% make it past their first year. Because the church is being the church. And my friend here who was just talking about this, we struggle together and we succeed together, right? We bear each other's burdens and we share each other's joys. Okay, we get the opportunity to do that. So a support friend is somebody who says, man, this breaks my heart. I want to be a part of this. I'm not in a season where I personally can foster, but I can bring meals. I can babysit so these foster parents can go get a date night. I can come and do some yard work. I can be praying on a regular basis. I can be sending notes of encouragement. I can consistently show up and be a part of their journey. So if that's you today, maybe you're interested in being a support friend. Maybe you're interested in learning more about fostering. Maybe you just want to know how you can pray. If you're interested in any of these things, your next step is the same. It's simply to come to the back table and to fill out one of these cards right here. It's just a little next step card. Listen, I give you my word. If you fill this card out, we will not drop a foster kid off to your house tomorrow. I promise. All right? All we're going to do is send you an email. Okay? We're going to email you some information about some meetings we have coming up. We call them interest meetings. They're about a little over an hour long, and they just will kind of break down what it looks like to be a foster parent, to be a support friend in this area. We'll talk about the needs, plenty of time for questions and answers and things like that. We actually have one tomorrow night just down the road. We'd love to invite you to that one in particular. Okay, but we've got them coming up. We want you to be a part of this. Come fill out this next step card. I'm probably over my time. I'm gonna wrap it up here. As I said, foster care is not for everybody, but Remarkable Compassion is. I began our conversation today telling you what the word compassion means. Let me tell you what the word remarkable means. Remarkable means you're able to remark on it. Very simple. In other words, it's worth talking about. So I flew down here yesterday. I'm up from the Bay Area. Flew down here yesterday on Southwest. My wife always asks, hey, how's the flight? It's fine, right? Because listen, the opposite of remarkable is not bad. The opposite of remarkable is fine, normal. It's not worth talking about. The flight down here wasn't exceptionally bad. It wasn't exceptionally good. It wasn't worth talking about. It was not remarkable. You and I were not meant to live lives that are fine, lives that are normal. We are meant to live remarkably compassionate lives, lives that are worth talking about, lives that are worth responding to and reacting to. In Matthew 5, Jesus says, let your light shine before others that they might see your good deeds and give glory to your Father who's in heaven. Are you living a life of remarkable compassion? When people look into your lives, they see the way that you spend your time. They see the way that you spend your resources. They see the way that you interact with your neighbors, the way that you do your work, the way that you are at school. Does it cause them to react? Does it cause them to respond? God is calling you and I into a life of remarkable compassion. Would you pray with me? God, I do pray that for every one of us here, myself very much included, God, that we would continue to take steps towards living a life, God, that honors you in every area. God, that is marked by a compassion, a moving towards those who are in need. And in such a way, God, that it causes the watching world to look on and wonder and ultimately to look up at you. God, we pray that you'd be stirring in the hearts of every person in this room, God. That you would help us to see, are we called to be involved in this or in another expression of compassion? And help us to follow you, God, with courage, with boldness, and with obedience. God, thank you for the Station Church. God, I pray that the Carlsbad area, that the greater San Diego County area would never be the same as a result of Station being here in this time and in this place. Bless him, God. Use him for the glory of your name. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen.
That was amazing, and I hope your heart was stirred and moved like mine was. And Philip is such a gentleman. He just gave you a nice, soft, gentle invitation, but you and I have history. And so I'm going to be more direct. And listen, don't leave here without stopping by that table and signing up. Let's have so many sign-ups that it blows, that they don't have room at the interest meeting tomorrow. That's a good problem, right? This is something that is near and dear to the heart of the Station Church and will be going forward. It's not going to be just, oh, that was a nice topic that day. It's not, I don't really feel like that. No, this is part of the Station Church. Because we believe passionately it's the heart of God. Those of you who know Tara and I's story, you know that this is part of our journey. That we have a little girl that we've adopted into our home, and we're praying through, man, should we foster another kid? Should we adopt? And it's like, oh, I don't know, it's hard. And after today, I'm like, okay, Lord. I don't know how you're not moved by that, personally. So at least we could show up to the interest meeting, get some more information, and find out. Maybe God's calling you to foster. Maybe that wasn't part of your plan when you woke up today, but now it is. And maybe that's too tall of an order. You'd say, that's a lot, Josh. I get it. But I think we can all be a support. And we have several families, part of this church, who have already adopted from the foster system. We have a family who's just recently licensed. They're about to foster. And so there's plenty of people to offer support to already. So let's not just hear this word, let's put it into action and respond. Amen? Amen. Come on, let's stand to our feet and sing together, and we'll see you in the lobby.
The Spirit of the Lord is here. The evidence is all around that the Spirit of the Lord atmosphere is changing now. For the Spirit of the Lord is here. The evidence is all around that the Spirit of the Lord is here. Overflow in this place. Fill our hearts with your love. We need your presence. You're the reason we came to encounter your love. Your love surrounds us. The atmosphere is changing now. For the Spirit of the Lord is here. The evidence is all around that the Spirit of the Lord is here. Overflow in this place. Fill our hearts with your love. We need your presence. You're the reason we came to encounter your love. Your love surrounds us. Overflow in this place. Fill our hearts with your love. We need your presence. You're the reason we came to encounter your love. Your love surrounds us. Spirit of God, fall fresh on us. We need your presence. Your kingdom come, your will be done here as in heaven. Spirit of God, fall fresh on us. We need your presence. Your kingdom come and your will be done here as in heaven. Spirit of God, fall fresh on us. Presence. Your kingdom come and your will be done here as in heaven. 'Cause we need your presence. Your kingdom come, your will be done here as in heaven. A miracle can happen now. For the Spirit of the Lord is here. And the evidence is all around that the Spirit of the Lord is here.
It's always so great
to worship with you guys. Remarkable compassion. That's what I took from today. Let's lead remarkably compassionate lives. So as you go out these doors, just remember those 2 words, and you're good. I hope you guys have a great week. We will see you back here next